Vorkuta is the fastest dying city in Russia. This is a prime example of what happens to Soviet motowns if they lack everything apart from a so-called city-forming enterprise. In just 30 years, Vorkuta has lost over half its population. At one point, it was the third largest city beyond the Arctic Circle, but today, it is empty. Nobody knows how many people live there. The official statistics don't reflect reality, as many locals have left Vorkuta long ago, but are still registered here. Many of the workers' towns around the city remain abandoned, which leads to the question, is Vorkuta even worth saving? Is it worth supporting the people that stayed here? Or is it best to just let the city die in peace? It looks like they spared no expenses when they built this place. You can see the rich decor. This is a typical example of Stalinist architecture. What's important here is that the houses that aren't abandoned, the ones that are falling apart, are still standing. This is a two-story house. It looks pretty sturdy and normal. It doesn't seem crooked. Getting to Vorkuta isn't as easy as it may seem. Trains from Moscow take almost 2 days to get here. There are no regular flights, and people often get stuck here for several days due to bad weather. I came here at the end of September to see the city before the snow and winter lights engulf it until spring. The first things you see in Vorkuta are beat-up roads, gray surroundings, and a pedestal with an old Soviet Mi-4 helicopter with Aeroflot written on the side. Vorkuta is located 150 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, on the edge of Russia's permafrost boundary. The climate here is harsh, cold, and humid, while the skies are always cloudy and gray. These harsh conditions prevented anyone from settling here until the Soviets came to power. The Russian government discovered coal deposits here back in the 19th century, so the industrial invasion of the Arctic Circle was practically predetermined. In 1938, Soviet secret police, or the NKVD, founded Vorkuta, which quickly became one of the largest camps in the Gulag system. Vorkuta owes its existence to the camp's prisoner slaves, who were used as forced labor in the coal mining works. In 1932, the government ordered the creation of a mine here. Not a town, a mine. Imagine you're 800 kilometers away, far from here, and you're assigned to develop a resource that's practically untapped at that point, like oil, gas, or even coal. They started building a narrow gauge railroad here at the end of 1933. It took 145 days to build, from the end of 1933 to 1934. It was ready by the end of 1934, this little narrow railroad. The track was 740 millimeters wide, with small, toy-like steam locomotives and 8 platforms that held as much coal as one freight car carries nowadays. How did people end up here? How could they come here? How were they transported here? Only by river. Up the Pechora and the Usa, and the remaining 64 kilometers up the Vorkuta River. To get to this place from Moscow, that took 2.5 to 3 months. For the first 30 years, the city and the mines were built exclusively by prisoners, many of whom died. These are my numbers. I haven't seen them published anywhere yet. For some reason, the data on the camps remains a state secret to this day. Why the hell it has to remain a secret, I don't know. The public got a glimpse of it after the fall of the Soviet Union. The archives were finally opened in the 1990s and people got to take a look. I managed to find out that the fatality rate of the prisoners that came through Vorkuta was 13%. That's more than 200,000 people. More than 200,000. They died. Not so much of hunger. It was hard and difficult. During the war years, of course, but from the injuries they sustained while working in the mines. Everything was done manually. People went up and down on foot, many fell sick, but many died because they got injured in the mines. After the Gulag was shut down in 1960, one question arose: what to do next? That's when the Soviet government decided to offer benefits and higher pay to people working in the far north. Workers poured into Vorkuta over the next 3 decades. One could make a very good living thanks to the so-called northern or polar bonuses. I finished school and studied here, and left for Leningrad in 1989, as it was known back then, and the contrast between the two cities was huge. Vorkuta was great. There were no food shortages, public transport ran on time, everything was neat and tidy and civilized. Leningrad, on the other hand, was abandoned, filthy and downright miserable. There was a massive contrast between the two. I remember that people got really long vacations here. Everyone had 3 months off, including my parents. We went traveling across the country. Vorkuta always looked better. It was much more civilized and intelligent when compared to other Soviet cities. It was just really, really good here. Vorkuta was doing well right up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. The country's steel mills ground to a halt, and demand for coal fell sharply. Mines began closing one after the other. Out of the 13 coal mines in Vorkuta that Russia inherited from the USSR, only 4 have survived to this day. Left without work, people headed south. This is what the dying city looks like today, all that's left of the oasis that it once used to be. Like in many other northern cities, people here try and jazz up the architecture with bright colors by painting ordinary Soviet panel apartment blocks. Cities with good roads are much better than those with bright buildings, if you ask me. They should have spent that money on road repairs. Then maybe Vorkuta would be more fun. I need to watch what I'm saying here. I'm used to calling these 5-story buildings, when in fact they're actually 3 or 4 stories high. Talk about architectural diversity. What's actually nice here is that a lot of the Soviet architecture remains unchanged. The neon signs, the street signs, the bas-reliefs on the buildings, they're all still here. Here's a Soviet-era vertical neon sign that says opticians. You can find this at Gagarina Street 10, and the sign's in pretty good shape. This is still an optical store, and its owners have lined the exterior with siding and put up a new printed-out sign. The new sign's clearly falling apart, while the beautiful Soviet one is firmly in its place. Instead of restoring and repairing the old sign to make it look good, they printed out and put up this piece of junk. You can clearly see the difference in the two approaches, how people used to do things and how they do them now. I wonder what this used to be. Everything's abandoned. That's abandoned. This is abandoned too. It would be strange to expect good roads in a place where everything is abandoned. I really want to say something nice about Vorkuta. I like that some streets don't have lampposts, but have these lamps instead. They're all leftovers from the Soviet period. This all reminds me of a film set. Like if you were in a movie studio and saw set decorations that made it seem like you were in London. This could be a set of a typical Soviet town. You turn here, that's where the set ends, and there's nothing beyond that. And we're back to our Soviet town film set. Streets and avenues, there's a pompous building in the distance over there, along with a monument to someone. Check this out. This is an old traffic light. It's not LED. You won't be able to see that in Moscow anymore. This is a really old, authentic traffic light. This street and these buildings date back to the 1950s. They were built by Gulag prisoners, and so they say, German POWs. We can look at the architecture and see that 70 years have gone by, and these buildings are still standing. They're sturdy, and by today's standards, if these houses were restored, if you put in modern communications and utilities and all the rest of it, this would be pretty decent real estate. You can clearly see here how they built houses at the beginning of the 1950s, right after World War II, and how they build bus stops today. These modern Russian bus stops look like garbage containers. This is what garbage dumps usually look like. The bins go in containers made out of roofing sheets. Many homes are abandoned, but some aren't. A few apartments here are still occupied, but the majority are abandoned, and people are leaving. The walls are already cracking here, but there are still people living inside. This is what it looks like from the backyard. It's kind of creepy walking around here. You look at all these buildings, this rich 1950s architecture, the stucco and everything else. On the one hand, it's delightful. But on the other hand, it's awfully sad. It's sad to see all this dying away. This is Vorkuta's old TV center, an old Soviet building that's now abandoned, built in 1958. Pretty affluent for these parts. As you can see, they didn't spare any money on infrastructure here in the 1950s and 60s to at least somehow please the people that worked in these difficult conditions. I wonder what young people do here. They get drunk. They get drunk? So there's not much entertainment here besides alcohol. The artist that was commissioned to make that sign agonized for a long time. He didn't have any ideas. He struggled and struggled. And then he looked up at his windowsill and saw a bottle of vodka. That's the shape that he decided to use for the sign. Look at this, guys. Even in Vorkuta, a city with no life, joy, or happiness, we see these fences. Even here, we see ugly fencing all over the place. This won't stop us from crossing the road, because there's no other crossing to be seen. There aren't even any cars here, and there are still fences. Abandoned buildings, shrubs, thickets, an old Soviet mosaic, and a new fence. Who comes up with this stuff? Our government isn't capable of doing anything else besides putting up these fences. They'll start putting up these fences in hell, between the cauldrons. Horrible. Here we see everyone's favorite 5-story buildings. Many still have the original balconies made out of wood. Look at this kiosk. That's a rarity straight out of Russia's 1990s. This is an essential local enterprise. There's an old Volga car up there too. You don't really see these landscapes anymore. In central Russia, these kiosks and stalls were scrapped a long time ago. You can still find them in Vorkuta, and you can probably buy everything you need there. Our younger viewers won't remember this, but there were even TV ads for these kiosks in the 1990s when capitalism was just kicking off. Russia's first entrepreneurs could advertise their kiosks on TV on cable television. This is what those ads looked like. Hey, hey, kid, come to our stall. You'll be glad that you didn't miss out. They'll open their little window now. It's already open, and it's like you're in church, at the confessional, peering through, waiting to get your groceries. Wonderful. We've only been out here for a few hours, and we already really want to get a drink. It's difficult to take all this in sober. I'll show you what I'm looking at right now. I'll flip the camera over. This reminds me of the rundown public housing in New York, where they dumped garbage out the windows onto the cops down below. This is probably one of the bleakest buildings in Vorkuta, mostly due to the slogan on the roof, "Glory to the Conquerors of the Arctic." It looks pretty bleak on its own, shabby with the paint peeling away and leaks all over its concrete walls. The slogan itself, "Glory to the Conquerors of the Arctic," is covered in rust and falling apart, and is perched on top of the building as a symbol of Vorkuta's decline. Hello, how are you? What's up with the sign? Why is it falling apart? We're tourists. I don't live in that house. Are you doing well? Goodbye then. In the north, people are wary for the most part and aren't willing to talk, as in the south, for example. Speaking of Soviet signs, look at this. This says, "Prestige 24 hours." What's prestige, Vladim? A brothel. Prestige, a brothel. This is what a typical backyard in Vorkuta looks like. Asphalt and dirt, cars parked all over the place. Bleak, shabby, and depressing. 5-story Soviet apartment blocks, and there has to be a children's playground in the center of it all. There's a slide with chains that looks more like a BDSM device, straight out of an illegal underground bondage club. Look at these rings and chains. All that's missing is a leather cross. Then again, why do they need a leather cross if they're already in Vorkuta? Life punishes you every time you look outside the window. You'll slide off this and go right under the wheels of your neighbor's car. For my viewers in Central Russia, that may seem like a harsh joke, but we're in Vorkuta. The people here are as harsh as the climate. This might as well be a suicide contraption. When you're fucking done with it all, when you're looking at Vorkuta off one of those balconies, you just wait for your moment. A car goes by, and you slide right under, especially in the winter. There are many patriots in Vorkuta, as we can see on the balcony there. Happy Victory Day! Someone wrote Happy Victory Day on their balcony. Even though it's almost October and Victory Day is in May, people are still celebrating the victory over COVID-19. Who knows? From 1 to 10 on the depression scale, Vorkuta is currently scoring about 15 or 16 points. I think I found something interesting. Maybe it's just me, though. Nope, I don't mean the puddle. A puddle's a pretty natural feature. Look at the pretty puddle. The windows and the lighting are slanted. The curtains are drawn. And when you're inside looking out, it may seem like a bright day outside. But you're in Vorkuta, damn it! I've never seen that before. Maybe that's something fairly normal and common, but I'm seeing this for the first time. It'll be interesting to see. I'm already anticipating how the locals will react to my video, because when I go to different cities, people start complaining. How dare you? You're specifically looking at all the shit. You can't hide shit from a pig. Why didn't you film our war memorial? Why didn't you film our churches and parks? Why film all the negative stuff? Goddamn liberals. You can find all this in America too. Moscow isn't like this. And all that other stuff. Will people start defending Vorkuta? Someone will surely say, Vorkuta is the best city on earth, and give me a list of their favorite spots. You don't really need to do much to film how bad everything is in Vorkuta. Literally go outside and turn on your camera. Showing Vorkuta in a positive light is something else entirely. Try making it look good so people fall in love with it and start coming back here. I've got it, Vladim. We'll buy really cheap flats here. I'll make a great video. The real estate market will skyrocket. We'll pocket the money and get the hell out of here in a month's time. Vorkuta also has the most affordable real estate in Russia. If you go on any real estate website, you'll see that a flat in Vorkuta may cost anywhere from $1,300 to $2,800. In some cases, especially when you look in the towns around Vorkuta, you might be able to buy a house for 1 ruble. Locals have also told us that people sometimes pay others just to get rid of their apartment or sign their homes over to homeless people. While the homeless in Russia are usually exploited in shady deals with shell companies, here in Vorkuta they become homeowners. All this is because of debt and high utility bills. Depending on the flat, you may rack up to $100 a month for electricity, gas, heating, and so on. That means if you don't live here but you have an apartment inherited from your relatives, you have to pay the bills every month. Your debts accumulate, and sooner or later, when you try and leave the country to go on vacation, you suddenly find out that your grandma's flat in Vorkuta has punched a massive hole in your family budget. That's why people get rid of these flats. The local government had a program to buy some of these properties, but that shut down because they realized that having hundreds of empty apartments draining the city budget wasn't such a good idea. All these homes need central heating, communications, and other utilities, which creates a big problem. If you want to give your friend a gift, but have no idea as to what that might be, give them a flat in Vorkuta. Hand them the keys to a 3-bed in the Vorkuta suburbs. You can give someone a 9-story house on their anniversary. Yes, you can give them a whole house. Maybe not a 9-story, but a classic Soviet 5-story block, along with all the debt. I doubt they'll thank you, but they'll remember it for the rest of their life. Look at how wonderful the world is without drugs. This really fills you with all the will to live. But not here. You go out into your backyard, and this is what you see. Entire buildings are abandoned. And this is right in the city center. All these buildings are empty. What are the problems in the city? In the city, well, you can see for yourself. No roads? They say they're fixing them all over town. But we don't see that in the outskirts. Can you survive in Vorkuta? We'll ask you straight up. Of course, we were born here. We live here now. So you can't? Talk to him about that. I don't think he's from here. You can survive, but that's all you can do. Survive. That's all it is. I don't think I've met anyone yet that doesn't want to leave. No one said that they're a patriot, that they want to live here, that this is their native land. We've heard none of that. Are you going to leave Vorkuta? When I grow up, sure. You don't want to stay? No, I don't. Do you want to leave? I have options, so you do. Have you ever wanted to leave? There's nowhere to go. If the possibility was there, would you go? Maybe. What about you? I'd happily leave. Do you want to leave? Nah. You sure? You're the first person that wants to stay. Nah, I grew up here, so I don't want to go. What's your salary like? It's not much. How much? About $400? You can live here for $400? Why not? If they had the possibility, the majority of people would clearly leave. The people that come here now are doing it for the money, just like in the old days. They still come here to get paid. We spoke to some miners and some other folks yesterday. Salaries here are 2 to 3 times bigger than in the South. The South is the local term for the rest of Russia. Salaries here are higher. A person working in a mine can take home $1,000, while more professional miners can get as much as $1,400. These salaries are pretty rare in Russia. The young people that come here finish their studies in Moscow and St. Petersburg, start looking for jobs, and realize they'll get paid $700 to $1,000 if they stay in either of those cities. But they can double or triple that if they come here. That's why they come to Vorkuta, to these inhuman conditions, to this depressing atmosphere, to earn some money. The first 3 years, you'll be in denial. Then, you'll fall into a depression, and aggression, and depression again. The Miners' Palace of Culture, one of Vorkuta's main architectural landmarks. There used to be a fountain in front of this palace with 3 nude women, but it's since become a bit simpler. There are no nude women here anymore, which is pretty sad. Here's another architectural landmark, the Mining Technical College. There aren't that many luxurious or interesting buildings here. What's a dude with a satellite doing here? Out the mine and straight into space. We're looking at a miner holding a Soviet satellite. A pretty interesting and brave architectural move if you ask me. Look what's with his left hand. He twisted it in the mine. Maybe he was tortured. This is a wooden staircase. That's pretty cool. A wooden staircase leading up to the mining college. We can enjoy the architecture of Lenin Avenue. Most of these buildings were designed by architects from the Leningrad School in the late 1950s and 60s in the post-war years, and adhere to a classical style. What's the Leningrad School of Architecture doing here, you may ask? Well, The Gulag didn't only provide the system with free miners, it provided it with free architects too. They designed these buildings. This is the Project building that used to be a project institute, and that over there is the Palace of Pioneers and School Children. This palace was named after the 50-year anniversary of the Great October Revolution. Here we have a 6-lane road with no traffic lights, not for the faint-hearted. This is either for the brave or the desperate. This is Vorkuta's main square, and what we see here is some kind of urbanism. We see arches, we see benches, there's bird everywhere. Looks pretty sad if you ask me. Pretty sad. This is the Severstal and Vorkuta Ugel building. It's famous because of the sign on the right that reads, "More coal for the motherland." You can see the sign while walking down Lenin Avenue, the city's main road. It's literally a massive red neon sign that says "More coal for the motherland." Why the motherland needs more coal isn't entirely clear, especially nowadays. What we should do with all this coal is a mystery. The prospects are pretty vague, as even the buyers that acquire this coal, high-quality coal, widely used in steel production, are slowly beginning to phase out with the advent of new technologies that don't require Vorkuta's famous coal for the production of steel. Soon, perhaps, no one will need it at all. Who's this monument dedicated to? Sergei Kirov, the Soviet politician. Initially, the architects were allowed to express their ideas and showcase their skills and abilities around Kirov Square, where you saw his monument. The buildings you saw there are very different from the ones across the rest of the city. Creativity was allowed. The money kept flowing. No one looked at the budgets because it was all financed by state subsidies. The managers didn't even think about how much they had spent. They were compensated for every penny. These were planned losses. State farms and other auxiliary production facilities began popping up across Vorkuta. A clothing factory that came out later, bakeries, dairy plants, a cold storage plant. These farms and facilities were all luxury. They didn't participate in the actual coal mining. But they did add to the cost of the coal. And no one counted the costs. That's why, well, we found something wonderful, something really amazing. Old 1950s doors at a new coffee shop. This used to be a public canteen. This coffee shop used to be a canteen. And it had the same doors? It sure did. This is interesting. The entrances to many of these homes have a list of contacts hanging outside. That's actually a modern sign. They're all printed on pieces of cardboard and hung on the front doors. This one's left over from the Soviet period. You can see an electrician's phone number. It's made of wood. It has this old wooden frame and it's still here. 70 years ago after World War II, there wasn't much money. Creating comfortable living conditions wasn't that high of a priority. It wasn't all for the people. All that took a backseat to restoring industries, factories, and so on. Even then, the Soviets somehow managed to churn out quality architecture. Look at the quality of the porch behind me. Look at the workmanship that's gone into that, and compare that to the new buildings going up in Russia's districts today. It would seem that our bright future has arrived. We have the technology, the materials, the freedom of choice. Here's a perfect example. Severstal, look. Severstal is Russia's largest steel company. They have tons of money, and this is what they have for a front entrance. They replaced the wooden door with a boring metal one, and put up this piece of shit instead of the old beautiful canopy. They took their money and basically ruined everything. They painted and cut the trees too. At least they cut the trees. I have no idea why they had to paint them. Look above the door. There's a bas-relief of a deer with a herder. That's pretty neat. Even the sign, the aesthetics of this plaque, are worse than a Soviet notice with the number of your local electrician. We saw it on one of the doors earlier. That one at least had a wooden frame. This is literally a plate that's been screwed to a wall. Taking into account Vorkuta's overall condition, the little things like this destroyed sidewalk don't even seem that bad. The things that you'd really notice in another city, the things that would make you mad, are met with nothing but a shrug in Vorkuta. Now Vladim, he grew up here. He grew up in Vorkuta, and he had a favorite cafe called Chukotka. It was the only one in town, and it was his favorite. We're headed there now, my friends, to see how nothing has changed, because we're in Vorkuta. Nothing changes here. Here we go, the Chukotka Cafe. Welcome. Now we're going to dive back into your childhood. Imagine that you're 6 years old. We're 6 years old. You're going for cakes with your mom and dad. It looks nice, and we're already welcome here. You want to go back in time, I see? To the Soviet Union? No, my friend grew up in Vorkuta and used to come here to your cafe. I was here 30 years ago. I don't think anything has changed. These walls definitely haven't. It's pretty. Look, they've got flowers. There used to be stained glass windows here. Stained glass windows? Stained glass, that's right. Are all your customers welcome? Yes, everyone's welcome, always, from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Has anyone ever not been welcome? Nope, that's never happened. This is a typical late Soviet door. I haven't seen these in a very long time. The door, the handle, look at how it's been made. When you look through here, you can see there are similar doors inside as well. The store is closed, but at least their Soviet doors have remained intact. The original windows have also been preserved. This electronics store ripped out that door and replaced it with a sad metal one. This is yet another backyard that's been poured over with asphalt. They got lucky though. This one's been recently replaced. These backyards are usually all torn up, but this one's got new asphalt. It's been resurfaced. There's that kiosk again, right in the middle of the yard. Welcome to the embankment, my friends. It seems to have had a fall. Check this out. The garbage bins are all bolted to the sides of the buildings. If they didn't do that, in the winter, they'd end up completely covered in snow? Absolutely right. Hello, how are you? You know, taking it little by little. Is everything all right? Any complaints? About what? Life. Life? Everything's all right, though? No, it's not. You've seen the state of our roads. Yeah, pretty bad. Are you from around here or are you from Moscow? Moscow. Well, there you go. Look at those houses over there. If they're not being torn down, they need to be restored, right? That's right. It'll be completely different. It's so ugly now. No one's doing that? No one. Who needs this? Whose fault is all this? The owner, whoever's in charge, they're to blame. Who's in charge? Putin? No, Putin's in Moscow. Who's in charge here, though? Oh, I don't even know their name. I see. Our flats don't even have a price, which is really frustrating. A 3-bedroom flat won't even sell for $6,800. People just drop their keys and leave town because they'd have to pay $100 a month for their utilities. What's the benefit? There is none. When we go to Moscow, there's nothing to say here. The prices are absolutely jaw-dropping. $300,000 or $400,000 for a flat. It's hard for us to even imagine. What did the people that gave their youth and health to this place get in return? What did the children of the workers of the far north get? And what about the widows and children of those who died in the mines? All of it turned out to be completely useless. The Stalinist palaces, the mines and coal production records. Today's Russia doesn't even have the means to relocate those that stayed here. This reminds me of Spitsbergen, 2 towns, Russia's Barentsburg and Norway's Longyearbyen. Both mine coal like Vorkuta. Longyearbyen is beautiful and clean. There are no slogans or bravado. Everything's just built with common sense. The Norwegians have figured out how to have the time of their lives on the edge of the world. Barentsburg is full of the same ruins, run-down panel housing, and endless slogans, posters, and monuments. People aren't the focus of this place. It's all about imperial grandeur and more coal for the motherland. To make life more fun for people, the government decided to hang famous Russian paintings on the sides of buildings. This is the work of Shishkin, Ivan Shishkin, and his Morning in a Pine Forest. And here comes a Paz, a Soviet bus, which also might be the work of a famous Russian painter. Here it is, coming down the street, majestically, slowly. It's literally crawling, and all the people are looking out. Why am I filming a bus? What do you know about luxury? This is real luxury right here. This looks like a Soviet sign. Perfume of some sort, along with other goods. Oh wow, what's this? That's the alarm system. It alerts the public of emergencies. An alarm system! Well, I think they realized that they're in Vorkuta already. They don't need it. We spent half an hour trying to order a cab in Vorkuta. All the apps and online services don't work or don't have cabs available. And when you call them, they genuinely seem surprised as to why you need a cab urgently. So when people order a cab here, they don't need it right now. They probably need it in a week's time. That's why everyone's surprised. You need a cab on Saturday evening? In Vorkuta? You must be joking. What happened? Something must have happened to make it urgent. That means we'll be walking to get dinner. Restaurants here are a lot like cabs. Vorkuta seems to be the capital of sushi and pizza. Out of all the restaurants they have here, everything that we got recommended offer just sushi and pizza. But there is one cafe that will be serving reindeer as a weekend special. Sushi with reindeer. Reindeer sushi. I have no idea what that is, but we're going there now. Vladim, are you ready? Let's go.
2 hours later.
I want to say that if you're ever in Vorkuta, my friends, this cafe we're going to is considered to be the best. You have no choice. You'll probably end up there. In terms of the food, well, it's edible. It'll do. But the vibes were something else entirely. I realized that I'm not a fun person. There was too much fun there for my liking. This is really scary. There's darkness everywhere, Vladim. My friends, it's unusually creepy in Vorkuta right now. It was creepy during the day and in the evening. Now it's nighttime, and the city's covered in this unbelievable fog. And you realize it was all right before. It was actually okay. How scary. I don't think I've ever seen a fog as thick as this before. I'm scared. We can hear people yelling. Look at this beautiful deer in the park. I think we nailed it with the lighting for this deer. The fog and the lights create this beautiful silhouette. This is an old park, and because it's old, there are lots of old Soviet decorations. How cute. Look at this. They fenced off these spheres, these globes, so that no one gets their dirty hands on them. That's why they're surrounded by this little fence. This park closes at 11 p.m., my loves, so get on your way. I've closed the gates already. No way. What's the time now? It's already 11. Oh, we're really sorry. We had no idea. Come back tomorrow and get in early. We came here to take a picture of the deer. The deer? You've passed it. It's over there. We're done. We just wanted to take a look around. Why are your globes fenced off? We're tourists from Moscow, don't worry. We might be asking stupid questions. They were probably being painted, and they did that to prevent people from touching the paint. That's right. Come back tomorrow. How are you doing? How's life? Never better. That's the most important thing. You seem to be in high spirits. There's no other way. I have to be. I can't just fall down and cry, can I? Behind me, you can see the town of Rudnik. It's fully abandoned now, but that's where the development of this area began. In the summer of 1930, Gregory Alexandrovich Chernov, a geologist, discovered high-quality coal here. The following year, people began arriving to begin develop and mine this coal deposit. And that's how the town of Rudnik came to be. It's pretty hard to get over there these days, or maybe it isn't. We'll try and see if we can get over that crumbling bridge. The town's completely abandoned. There's nothing there, and they've even begun demolishing it. There's also a monument to the first mine in the area, which began being built in 1931. Rudnik was the first settlement on the Vorkuta River. Everything's abandoned now, but it used to be home to some pretty good architecture. Now it's all overgrown with shrubbery and non-native trees. All this was built by Gulag inmates. People began being relocated out of Rudnik in the 1990s, and it became deserted by the early 2000s. The district's main problem was its location on the other side of the river and lack of an automobile bridge. My friends, our main goal now is not to fall on these rusty steps, because we're going to cross the river over a bridge that's actually closed. But we're vandals, so we'll make our way over that bridge towards the abandoned town of Rudnik. We'll take a look at the place where Vorkuta got its start. Someone made a hole in that fence, so we'll be all right. This is almost San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge. There's an obelisk here, along with Rudnik's main building. When all of this was being planned, they drew up an embankment, a promenade. They thought that people would go right down to the river. This is an age-old question. People look at all this beauty. They take it all in, admire it. Look at how they used to build. They used to build palaces. Look at those beautiful houses, these beautiful views, and all the other riches. They don't make that anymore. People used to... Oh, I almost fell there. We're going into this palace right now. There used to be grand staircases here. All of this is now ruined. The windows are bricked in. The ceilings have collapsed, along with the stairs. There are still traces of stucco, but practically everything's ruined. All these palaces. Vorkuta has an advantage. If these buildings were in Moscow, they'd be frequented by the homeless. There'd be squatters all over the place. Well, this is pretty clean. Very clean, Vladim. No one lives here. This is some sort of a lost world. When people look at all this, they ask the question. In Soviet times, they used to spare no effort. They made all this beauty. What about now? You need to remember that when you have a free workforce, unpaid labor, you can build whatever you want. You can build canals, lift the country up off its knees and what have you. We need to remember the conditions that these workers lived in and how they died. They say that 13 to 15% of prisoners that came through these Gulag camps died here. Many compromised their health, lost their health, and lived in horrifying conditions. The second thing is that the style of totalitarian architecture wasn't a uniquely Soviet phenomenon. Totalitarian architecture was a big part of Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy. These totalitarian neoclassical styles were part of the propaganda. These pompous buildings were part of the propaganda that was supposed to work within the country's borders, showing people their place. Because when people left their barracks, hungry and cold, they saw those palaces and realized their insignificance, and understood that they were just a cog in a big machine. This architecture is designed to overwhelm and oppress. When we open a gigantic ministerial door, when we go into the Moscow metro, when we see these massive palaces towering over the tundra, we understand that we're nothing but a cog in the system. It's telling us to sit tight and shut up. The propaganda had to work abroad, too, because the Soviets wanted to show the world how wonderful the country was, and boast about their grandiose construction projects and other achievements. They wanted to show the damned capitalists how great everything was, and create a rosy image of Soviet life. Look at us. We built a city in the middle of the tundra. These slogans and achievements had absolutely nothing to do with real life. Totalitarian architecture was eventually replaced by post-war modernism. After World War II, totalitarian architecture was completely discredited in Europe, although it remained in Russia right up to the death of Stalin. In Germany and Italy, it was quickly replaced by simple democratic modernism that everyone seems to hate now. What are these gray boxes and so on? Totalitarian architecture in Europe was associated with fascism and oppression, with violence and all other disasters that Europe had to endure. The main question that remains is, why the f*** was all this necessary? They built all this, killed thousands of people, and now what? Me and Vladim can now walk among these ruins, taking pretty pictures, and that's it. There's no why here. That question wasn't asked back then. We live in a world now where everything's precise, everyone's got a business plan, and everyone asks that question. Sorry, Vladim, but that's what we started with. We live in a world now where people have to get paid for their work. If you ask someone to come work in Vorkuta, these miners and all the other people from the so-called Russian South, they get paid really well, more than in Moscow. If Severstal wanted to send a specialist here, they won't work for a bowl of stew made out of wallpaper glue. These parts aren't only known for the largest camp in the Gulag system, but also because of a terrible tragedy. In June 1953, prisoners at Vorkuta's Gulag began to strike. In the USSR, they called it the Vorkuta Uprising, but this isn't entirely accurate. There was no uprising. The prisoners rejoiced at Stalin's death and hoped for amnesty. The amnesty only applied to criminals and those with short prison terms. Gulag was a camp for political prisoners, and the methods they chose to fight this injustice were also political. They held rallies, refused to go to work, and obey the demands of the camp's administration. By the end of July, over 15,000 prisoners had refused to go to work. Mine number 29 had a special contingent: the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the Lithuanian Forest Brothers, the Polish Home Army, German POWs, Andrei Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army. These people knew their discipline. They separated themselves from the criminals, decided not to go to work, and only supported the drains and ventilation in the mine. They didn't mine any coal. They cordoned off a food warehouse, took an inventory of the supplies, and realized they had enough for an entire month. We'll hold out for a month and see what happens. They created a strike committee out of all the categories of prisoners. It surprises me to this day that all these groups that were sworn enemies outside the camp, the Polish and the Ukrainians, the Germans, the Russians and Vlasov's army, how they managed to unite and create a general strike committee that was incredibly well organized. The threat of the use of weapons was neutralized in all the other camps, but not here. They demanded that a government commission came to Vorkuta to resolve their problems. They didn't trust the mail or the local administration because they knew that they presented a threat to the strike. When the USSR's Deputy Interior Minister, General Maslenikov, arrived at Gulag, they began filtering the prisoners into two groups, separating those that were reliable from those who took part in the strike. Many prisoners agreed to end their strike and went back to work, but Department Number 10 continued to hold out. Maslenikov didn't come to negotiate, but to convince the strikers to go back to work. When he arrived at the camp, along with his entourage, all these people got into orderly rows and went out into the main square. Maslenikov turned to his entourage and said, "You said they were a mess. If I had this kind of order in the army, I would be more than happy." Maslenikov began negotiating. They gave him notebooks full of the demands they wanted met, so they could end their strike. They wanted to take off their prisoners' numbers, to correspond with their relatives, a review of their cases, They saw their sentences and the Soviet tribunals as unjust. The general replied that, as prisoners, they had no right to demand anything. They could only ask. I won't accept these demands. Each person can write to me on their own, and that will be reviewed in Moscow, after which a decision will be made. They replied, if you can't do anything, then why'd you come here? Go back from where you came. We'll wait for someone who can solve our problems. The general left, but on the following day, the camp was surrounded by troops. Trenches were dug. The guards in the towers suddenly had sandbags, and additional machine gun units were also deployed. The prisoners realized that something was afoot, that this was something out of the ordinary. That's why they kept a tight lid on things and stopped any provocations, so there were no sudden moves or incidents, as that could have given the guards a reason to shoot everyone, to mow everyone down. On the 1st of August, a car with loudspeakers pulled up to the camp, along with a fire engine and an ambulance, and they started demanding that everyone go back to work. The strikers got about 200 people to stand in the square in front of the camp gate and had everyone really close to each other because they thought that the troops won't shoot into a crowd. A soldier has to understand where to shoot. And they had everyone stand tight. They'd be shot if they broke formation. The soldiers tried entering the camp, but the prisoners blocked the gate, and that meant direct disobedience of the camp administration's order. That's when the shooting began, disorganized and random. They shot at the crowd, and in a minute or two, they had killed every single prisoner. The 200 people that came out were all on the ground. Some were dead, some were wounded, some just fell to the ground in an attempt to avoid getting shot. That's how the strike was suppressed. 53 people were killed. When were these crosses put up? At different times. These oak ones were put up at the end of the 1980s. The Lithuanians and the Ukrainians put them up in memory of those events. These were literally just sticks with prisoners' numbers on them. I see. 1953. These are the ones that were killed. In 2003, thanks to these crosses, the ones put up by our predecessors, we were able to identify the names of the dead. The Soviet Internal Ministry had made a report about the results of the Uprising suppression, and all these people were named there. We were only able to identify the names of these 53 people in the local archives. We were able to find the names of the dead by referencing the numbers on the graves. They were painted on or carved onto the sticks. The societies of repressed Lithuanians and Ukrainians initiated the erection of these crosses, for the most part. This graveyard was often condemned to oblivion. There were even calls to demolish it and raze it to the ground. People simply refused to comply with these instructions and instead chose to preserve the crosses. Vitold Antonovich Ignatovich was part of the Vorkuta strike committee. I have a lot of respect for this man, because he was the first to die when the shooting started. He didn't leave his fellow prisoners. He called for active resistance, and when the situation began to escalate, he remained in the vanguard of the protest and kept people from panicking and throwing themselves at the soldiers. He kept everyone disciplined, and he was the first to die. He was the first Pole to die. He was shot in the head. An officer shot him right in the head. There's a monument here dedicated to the memory of the victims of political repression. We see a massive rock wrapped in barbed wire, which is symbolic. That's the monument. It's not really well kept. It's slowly falling apart. This marble plate has evidently cracked. The location is a bit weird. There's a parking lot nearby, dirt everywhere. This is a strange memorial plaque. To the glory of all saints, one essence. Many letters are missing, so it's pretty difficult to determine what it's dedicated to. It's right in the middle of all this wasteland, and someone even put their trash right next to it. Right next to this memorial stone. What is this? I have no idea. I don't know what this is either. That's Patriarch Kirill, head of the Russian Orthodox Church. The photo's faded. A faded patriarch looking at a monument in the wasteland, surrounded by garbage. If we look at Russian propaganda, what is Russia proud of? Sure, our grandfathers fought in World War II, but it's been 75 years, and having new achievements to be proud of wouldn't be so bad. Sure, Yuri Gagarin had his famous space flight. That's great. What about something modern? We built the Crimean Bridge. Fantastic, wonderful. We hosted the Sochi Olympics. We hold military exercises with rockets that can destroy the planet. I'd like the news to tell us that no one died due to a car accident, that no one died while driving, or that Russia's standard of living got closer to that of European countries. I'm not even talking about Scandinavian countries. So that we can be proud of how ordinary people live their lives. The people have to share in the fruits of these achievements. But all our efforts are directed at creating propaganda. We're literally standing bare-assed. You travel around Russia in complete shock. Dying villages, poverty everywhere, hopelessness, people that can't afford to do anything, no jobs, no future, that are just surviving. But we're loudly thumping our chest and boasting about our successes. I'd like to see success for the common man. Vorkuta isn't the scariest thing in the Russian north. The scariest parts begin outside of it. Dozens of large and small towns that remind you of horror film sets. They were originally built for mine workers, but after the mines shut down, the towns died with them. People left behind abandoned houses and roads, cultural establishments and closed stores. What's scariest about all this is that there are still people living in these dying towns. Everyone forgot about them. No one needed them anymore. Inscriptions in chalk reading, "Inhabited home," and "People live here," remind one of wartime footage, when finding people among the rubble after heavy shelling was an incredibly hard task. There is news on the internet about locals selling their flat for 1 ruble. That may seem funny at first, but there's actually a tragedy underneath. Imagine, everything that you've worked for, everything that was supposed to provide for your retirement years, suddenly collapsed. Everyone that could have left town, and those that stayed, now have to write "People live here" on the front doors of their homes. This section of the building is abandoned, but there are still people living over in that part. All of this looks terrible. This may be ordinary Soviet 5-story panel housing, and this isn't the first time I'm seeing abandoned homes. But what's stunning here is the absence of life. There's literally no one around. You walk around here, and there are no people, no animals, no cars. This town is completely abandoned and extinct. All these homes have been evicted quite recently. There was life here, not too long ago. There used to be stores on the ground floor. This used to be a canopy. They knocked that down. There are still bills and letters in the mailboxes. There are some dated 2020. People left here quite recently and everything died. This is a utility bill for $18 dated March 2020. The total debt is close to $800. $800. Apartments don't cost that much here. All these bills are folded up here. You can take one. We'll replace the ruling party. Look, the electricity works. This house is still hooked up to the power grid. Here are some flats. The windows are still intact. They didn't take down the radiators. The radiators are still... Are they still warm? Nope, they're cold. People must have left this place not too long ago. Those homes don't have windows already, but everything's still in place here. Both the windows and the radiators. A fireplace. They must have left really recently. United Russia, our ruling party. This is their newspaper. Let's see what kind of bright future they're promising us. Your vote for United Russia is your support for the president's course of action. You can see the president's course if you look out the window. Why don't you leave this place? Who's going to relocate us? No one. Are you filming us? No, we're tourists. Oh, tourists. Well, our town is slowly dying. One family lives in this part of the building. I live in this section. You live here alone? Yes. You have an entire section all to yourself? What's life here like? Well, that's how we live. What should we do? You'd leave if you had the chance? Of course. Is there public transport here? Any buses? The 103 used to run and the 44 still runs, but it doesn't run on weekends. So, if you don't have a car on the weekend, you can't leave? No, only if you walk or take a cab. You seem optimistic. I am. There you have it. A fairly common example of someone living alone in one of these buildings. And you begin to understand how many resources you need to keep electricity and water running. This is a hopeless situation. The government isn't relocating the people that have stayed, but it's impossible to live here. Horrible. On the other hand, people want to leave. They're waiting for their opportunity. All of this is collapsing around them. It's a nightmare that seems to have no end. So here you have the Palace of Culture, but all the houses around it have died out. These are grocery stores. It's all abandoned. All of this has been abandoned because the town has ceased to exist. The mines shut down. There's no work. People can't work anywhere. So those that have the opportunity go to the city, while others wait to be relocated beyond Vorkuta, to central Russia. They're probably going to miss out on that, though. The relocation program has exhausted all its resources. Over the length of the program, the entire city of Vorkuta could have been relocated several times over. As you understand, the money that was allocated to that program were partly stolen. That's what I'm claiming, even though I can be persecuted for these allegations once you release your video. I'm claiming that the money repeatedly ended up in government officials' pockets. That's all there is to it. Before my very eyes, money was allocated towards the construction of a house. All the responsible parties got together. Then it turned out that the construction company went bankrupt. The funds vanished. The money was buried. This happened 3 or 4 times. I saw it all. Money was allocated towards 3 or 4 homes instead of 1. I'm claiming that Vorkuta could have been relocated 3 or 4 times over, using money from the International Monetary Fund. The head of the local administration, Igor Guryev, says a further 155 homes remain abandoned. According to him, they're not being demolished because there's simply no money to do so. The price tag to take them apart is $2.75 million. The government also can't relocate the people out of these towns because, according to Guryev, the law doesn't allow that. In order to start relocating people, the city limits apparently need to be expanded, which is strange as most of these towns are already part of Vorkuta. This is an essential part of any Soviet settlement, a Lenin monument. Homes are being abandoned. Everything's boarded up and sad, but Lenin's still here. State standards manage to reach even the most desolate of areas. There's a pedestrian crossing here. The sign has to be framed up, and over there as well. If there are people living on the other side of the road, this side's completely abandoned. All the homes are boarded up. There used to be stores here. This was teeming with life, but there's nothing here anymore. If there are still hints of life in Vorkuta, stores, cafes, shops, and all sorts of other stuff, then here feels like a ghost town. There are still people living in this building, and over there too. But this one's abandoned. Everything that could have been taken out got taken out. Although, I don't see what there is to take here. No one needs any of this. No one needs furniture or anything else. Because people are leaving. There are chairs here. I see cages lying around. It makes me want to move here. Look at how beautiful all this is. That being said, people do stay here and continue to work. There's someone with a stroller over there. Some houses continue to be inhabited. Sometimes only one section of the house is occupied, while the rest is completely empty. Look at this flat. There's still furniture inside. They didn't even take the furniture. They just got up and left. This is one of the first ghost towns not too far from Vorkuta. The buildings here are already being taken apart. No one needs them. Even though they're made out of bricks, they're pretty sturdy and in good condition. They're being taken apart. We had confidence in some sort of future, our foreseeable future. Now, people can't even look a year ahead. People can't plan ahead. That scares people, much more than poverty or hopelessness. The story with Vorkuta, when people look at the footage, they start saying, "That's horrible. It all needs to be saved. We picked everything away." Let's ask a different question. What do we do with all this? It's not necessary. It's unprofitable. People can't live here. They won't live here. You can continue dragging these towns on for eternity, but there's really no need for all of them. I don't know if I can call Vorkuta a mistake, the result of misplaced Soviet ambitions. They set out to develop this area without sparing resources or people. A private company operates here now. Severstal? Yeah, Severstal. Severstal owns everything here now. They can take one look at their accounts. We don't need that much coal. They'll leave as many people as they need to mine as much coal as they need. There's no need to set mining records now. Records, records, records. Remember that sign, "More coal for the motherland"? Why does the motherland need more coal? There were plans from 1940 that said by 1945 there would be 60 mines in Vorkuta, extracting 20 million tons of coal. These plans weren't based on any real economic or industrial needs, but they existed nonetheless. These somewhat voluntaristic decisions continue to affect the city to this day. You can still see the "More Coal for the Motherland" slogan on the Vorkuta Gold building in the center of town. For as long as I've lived in Vorkuta, the locals have asked, "Motherland, how much coal do you need?" No one knew the answer to that question. No one knew how much coal we needed. They reached the 20 million ton mark, but not in 1945. In 1985, 40 years later. So what do we do about Vorkuta? I see the following solution. You need to determine the exact amount of people that need to remain in Vorkuta. Judging from what the experts are saying, that would be around 20,000. That includes everyone that would operate and work at the remaining mines, as well as those who will take care of the services in the city itself. 20,000 people can comfortably fit in the center of Vorkuta. I see no reason to maintain the towns around the city. People can be relocated to the flats in the center of Vorkuta that are either for sale or abandoned. By the way, Vorkuta has one of the lowest housing prices per square meter in Russia. They start from $70 to $80. We need to determine which houses and districts need to be relocated and determine the homes where people will eventually move. The evicted homes have to be demolished immediately. Abandoned homes are part of the local cityscape. They've been here for decades, causing nothing but depression and sadness. Everything needs to be demolished, while the construction waste should be properly recycled and disposed of. The homes that remain need to be restored. as it's currently difficult to tell abandoned and inhabited homes apart. The people that are being relocated need to be offered better conditions than their former homes. The local authorities are complaining that people don't want to move out of their apartments. Well, what do they expect? They're offering them the exact same run-down panel housing a couple of blocks down the road. Of course no one wants to move. That would be trading bad for worse. Building new houses could also be an option. Look at the houses the Norwegians built on the island of Spitsbergen. Vorkuta has to become much more compact and tight-knit than it is now. The city was founded almost 90 years ago. It's time someone thought about the people. Removing the cannibalistic "more coal for the motherland" slogan off the city's main street would be a wonderful start, along with building at least one good playground. Where do we get the money, you ask? Russia can stop sponsoring vampires like Lukashenko, who was recently given $1.5 billion, and finally start spending with the people in mind. I'm sure the people of Vorkuta have earned their right to be treated like human beings through their hard work.